Steve McGregor, he's a very gifted filmmaker. In fact, there's some awesome Aboriginal filmmakers making great... I mean, they're just films. You know, that's so powerful about them. They're just great storytelling. I mean, it's a culture, by the way, built on storytelling. So can you imagine, you know, what that means when you are, in fact, an identified storyteller? I worked with Steve McGregor, collaborating on the text. As he termed it, it's a white fella love story with a black fella heart. All right? And we built that story. We worked with the actors. He was a director, writer-director. So he was in charge of all the Aboriginal team. In addition to shoot some of these landscapes, we had to actually go and have a sort of détente with the different tribes. I mean, to sit under, sandy beaches, and this beautiful woman called Mignonette, who was Stolen Generation, and say, Mr. Luhrmann, we just care about one thing. You show how beautiful our land is. And then it's yes. So I struggled absolutely to try and show the land as beautifully as possible. Then we had many different tribal groups in it, and many different Indigenous actors. To give an example, someone like Brandon Waters, who never acted before in his life, and his mother's in the film, and actually his sister is his double. I shouldn't tell you that. You might be looking for his sister all the way through the film. Oh, that's the girl, to David Numanjara, but also David Gopalil. Now, David Gopalil, I don't know, does anyone here know a film called Walkabout, Nick Rogue picture? Yes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. How come it took so long to admit it? Right? It's a beautiful, strange film, but in it is a young Aboriginal guy about 19. His name is David Gopalil. Awesome actor. Has been in almost every Australian film. Then sort of ran away to the bush. But I found this kind of amusing to give you an idea of what kind of life he led. David is on the set. He speaks like this. It was great at the press conference. He goes, he's fantastic. He goes, I want to say something. Buzz, he tracks me. He tracks me down. He's a tracker. He find me in Darwin. It wasn't quite true. I went up there to see his son, and David leapt out of a bunch of bushes, literally leapt out of some bushes, and he said, Buzz, you and I are going to tell a very important story. Little Bird told me we're going to tell the world a very important story. And to this day, because he's quite mystical, I'm not sure whether it was that David is mystical or he's just an actor trying to get a job, but he was absolutely awesome. And then he says to me at the end of the shoot, to give you an idea of his life, right? If you've seen the film, I mean, he's extraordinary looking and extraordinary sensibility, but he said, Buzz, because he's been in the bush a long time, gets into trouble a bit. That guy I played didgeridoo with in Central Park, New York, that Jimi Hendrix, he's still alive? I said, you got to get out more, David. So he was like sort of a friend of the Beatles and very, very much taken up in that time because it was so extraordinary. And he is the only Aboriginal superstar. And he's been on the carpet at Cannes. So when you see the film and you see this extraordinary, ancient, mystical man, that is the great David Gopalil. Now, to come back to answer your question, one of the tribes, and probably the tribe of most meaning... By the way, of course, there's only one review I really care about. It was one written by an female Aboriginal anthropologist from the University of Melbourne. It's in The Age. My assistants could provide you with a copy if you'd like to read it, because I'm very, very taken by this review. He said, who would have thought after all this time that a broad entertainment could do more for reconciliation than politicians have managed to do in the last 20 years? So you can imagine when it comes to the headline of a review, I had to feel pretty happy about that. But she went on to say, and I thought it was pretty extraordinary, not only did she say, she went on to talk about the film, and when we got to the bit in the cinema, she said, I saw my own seat down front where Aboriginals and Asian people sat when I was a little girl in Queensland. But she went on to talk about, in a much more profound way than I could, really how the Stolen Generation issue was handled. So she ratified it from an academic point of view. Final story, we bring the elders we work with several tribes, but the Mirrawong, which is a very small tribe, we bring them all down to Sydney to show the film, because I want to get notes. I'm getting notes all the way through the film. I mean, every time I did something, Steve would get them all together and we'd ask them. And actually, I never found an imposition in storytelling at all. I found it an excitement. It was exciting and sort of an adventure, you know? They would say, well, it wouldn't really happen that way, blah, 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 blah. And I go, really? Oh, well, show me, you know? And then I put that in the film. But it was a great thing when they came down because they were extremely moved. I mean, the Stolen Generation part of it was moving for them, but they were just so much more excited because they were stockmen, meaning we had, Aboriginal cowboys were the backbone of the cattle industry in Australia. And they went, oh man, when we rode them horses, we was king. We was king. And to see themselves up on that screen, and they were truly blown away from it. And the young fellas, they said, made them proud that their culture was... There's one thing to make, I think there are these great smaller films that you make. You can make a small film that is more didactic and pointed politically, but it will have an audience that is of a certain size. And I don't want to make a political film. I want to make a huge entertainment, which unavoidably put this issue at the center of the storytelling, and therefore it wasn't about right or wrong or good or bad. For every good group, not every Aboriginal in this film is a good person, and not every missionary in it is a bad person. What I wanted to do was put this issue simply at the center of the storytelling, and as actually my Aboriginal collaborators will tell you, once the story is told, it is, and therefore you move on. So, did I answer the question?
We have time for 2 more questions.
Okay. Over here. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'll start out.
Okay.
One of the biggest issues that I've found in Moulin Rouge was...
Wait, here's the mic. Okay.
One of the biggest issues that I found in Moulin Rouge was the issue of trust for the characters, trust between themselves, and trust of themselves too as they live out their lives and have to become who they were. And I find that in your other works as well. And you mentioned some about this, balance between the process and the personal. And I'm just curious, Baz, in your life, is there a place where you learn to trust your voice even before, when that filmmaker or the gentleman that you mentioned earlier that you were interning for kind of pushed you in that direction? Or
Peter Brook, yeah.
You know what? That is a very, very good question because, I'm a bit jet lagged. But when you make a large film or even a small film, you go on this thing called a PR tour, and you end up speaking to. You might speak to, an average day. You might speak to 30. You might do 30 television interviews a day, and maybe another 150 journalists. On a light day. Now I bring this up because you can spend a lot of time wasting your time just by kicking things out road. And what I try to do is actually have a real conversation, as exhausting as it is. And I'm saying that because every now and then, because the truth is, people come in, they often say, in fact, the first words out of most journalists' mouth, and I really respect them, and there are good journalists and there are not so good ones, right? They always say, I suppose you've been asked this question 100 times. And you try and be polite and go, oh, no, not so much, no. And of course you go, well, about 2,000 today, but I have not ever been asked that question. So bravo, because it just shows you can be surprised every day. Now I have to think about the answer. I tell you something, that I'm not sure about it, but I'm sure about one thing. I'm sure about there was a moment in my own journey, there's been a couple of moments when something's happened, and for some reason I've lost my strength to ultimately stay with my instinct. And I've backed away from it and got sort of self-conscious. And I found those moments to be, there's about 4 or 5 of them, where they were super destructive to my journey, my creative journey, whatever you like to call it. Where I basically got self-conscious about my own instincts, and I lost them. And I lost contact with what I instinctively would have done. Now, I want to put a caveat on this. I don't mean that I go right, I got it, I know what it is, it's not von Stroheim area, Although I'm sure I'm easy to paint as a sort of von Stroheim-like figure. The leather jacket and the joggers, riding crop. The truth of it is that it's not like that, because once I have an initial instinct, I love to be the big debater of it myself, and to debate constantly with everyone. I'm always in a constant debate about the idea. Ultimately, it comes to full circle, and then ultimately, it's what I call listen to everybody, then finally you have to listen to yourself, listen within. And then say, not what I think, actually, but what do I feel? They're two different things. Everyone thinks this, and in filmmaking, my goodness, you have to do that about 300 times a day. Seriously. Everything from, should it be that shoelace, to It's 1,500 head of cattle, right? Do we or do we not fly them